Some objects carry history, others carry tragedy. But there are a rare few that seem to carry intent and awareness that grows stronger with every hand that touches them. This is not a story about a haunted house or a cursed location bound to a single place on the map. This is the documented account of a single object that has traveled across countries, decades, and bloodlines, leaving behind empty homes, unanswered police reports, and a growing list of people who vanished without a trace. No bodies were ever found. No signs of struggle were ever confirmed. Just silence. And in every case, the same object remained behind, untouched, waiting. This is the story investigators tried to bury, collectors tried to destroy, and families tried to forget. This is the story of the doll that made every owner go missing. The earliest known record of the doll does not come from a police file, a museum archive, or a collector's registry, but from a handwritten inventory ledger discovered in the basement of a defunct antique shop in rural Vermont, dated November 1923. Where a single entry stands apart from the rest due to the absence of basic identifying details, listing only porcelain child Dollenmart origin unknown, followed by a note written in darker ink that appears to have been added later. Do not place near mirrors. The shop belonged to a widower named Elias Monroe, a quiet man known locally for buying estate leftovers from abandoned properties. And according to town records, Monroe was the first confirmed owner of the doll, though no receipt or bill of sale has ever been found to explain how it came into his possession. The doll itself was described by neighbors as unsettling but unremarkable at first glance. Approximately 2 feet tall, pale porcelain skin with faint cracking around the joints, real human hair sewn into its scalp in uneven strands, and glass eyes so dark they appeared almost black in low light. Yet several people who saw it recalled the same strange detail, that the doll's expression seemed to subtly change, depending on where one stood, as if its face was never meant to be viewed directly. Monroe reportedly kept the doll seated on a small chair behind the shop counter, facing away from the front windows, and refused all offers to sell it, claiming vaguely that it was waiting for someone else, a statement that was initially dismissed as eccentricity until his sudden disappearance on the night of January 14, 1924. When the shop was found unlocked, the lights still burning, cash left untouched in the register, and no signs of forced entry or violence present anywhere in the building. The only thing out of place was the doll, which had been moved from its chair and placed upright in the center of the shop floor, its head slightly tilted upward, facing the back stairwell leading to the basement, where Monroe's coat and boots were discovered neatly folded at the bottom step, as if removed deliberately before descending, though no footprints, blood, or disturbance were ever detected beyond that point. The official police conclusion listed Monroe as a missing person, presumed deceased, yet no search of the surrounding woods, rivers, or neighboring towns produced a single clue, and within weeks the shop was closed, its contents auctioned off, except for the doll, which no buyer would accept after several attendees reported feeling nauseous, lightheaded, or suddenly anxious when standing too close to it. Ultimately, the doll was sold privately to an out-of-state buyer whose name was redacted from public records, marking the beginning of a pattern that would not become clear until decades later. that the doll never disappears with its owners, and it never remains where it is, unwanted, always resurfacing, always intact, and always accompanied by another unanswered absence. The man who purchased the doll after the Monroe auction was identified only years later through fragmented shipping records and a single surviving letter. His name being Arthur Bellows, a traveling clock repairman from Albany, whose work required him to move constantly between rural towns, staying briefly, leaving little trace behind, which may explain why his disappearance initially went unnoticed. Bellows acquired the doll through a private transaction arranged by the auctioneer, who later claimed he felt an overwhelming urge to be rid of the object as quickly as possible, describing a sensation like being watched from behind whenever the doll was nearby. And according to the limited correspondence that remains, Bellows did not buy the doll out of fascination, but out of irritation, writing that it was unpleasant, poorly made, and likely worthless, yet something compelled him to take it anyway. An impulse he would later describe in a letter to his sister as a mistake that already feels old, though he never elaborated on what he meant by that phrase. Bellows transported the doll with him in a wooden crate, and for several weeks nothing unusual was reported, until he settled temporarily in a boarding house in northern Pennsylvania, where the landlady recalled hearing him argue loudly with someone in his room late at night, despite the fact that no visitor was ever seen entering or leaving. And when questioned about the noise the following morning, Bellows appeared confused, insisting he had slept through the night and had no memory of raising his voice, a response that unsettled the landlady enough that she asked him to leave within days. It was during this period that Bellows began documenting strange disturbances in a small leather-bound notebook later recovered among his abandoned belongings, writing of recurring dreams in which he stood at the edge of a dark room while a child's silhouette moved slowly behind him, always just out of sight, and of waking to find the doll seated in places he did not remember placing it, sometimes facing walls, sometimes closets, and once positioned directly in front of his bed, its glass eyes reflecting moonlight in a way he described as wrong, like depth where none should exist. The final entry in Bellows' notebook was dated March 3, 1924, noting simply that the doll had begun to feel heavier, not in weight but in presence, and that when he attempted to lock it inside its crate, he later found the lid open and the nails bent outward, as though pressure had been applied from within, though no marks or damage were visible on the doll itself. Bellows vanished 2 nights later, his rented room discovered empty except for the doll, which had been placed carefully on the chair beside the window, facing outward toward the street, while Bellows' clothes and identification were arranged neatly on the bed, suggesting preparation rather than panic. Police once again found no signs of struggle, no blood, and no indication that Bellows had left the building alive. Yet, several witnesses claimed that in the early hours before dawn, a child-shaped figure had been seen standing in the second-floor window of the boarding house, unmoving, backlit by a single lamp, though when authorities investigated, they found only the doll, exactly where it had been left, untouched, unbroken, and waiting. By the time Arthur Bellows was officially declared missing, the doll had already changed hands again, though not through any documented sale, instead appearing months later in the possession of a woman named Margaret Klein, whose connection to Bellows was never established, but whose circumstances mirrored his in unsettling ways. As she lived alone, traveled infrequently, and left behind few close relationships who might immediately notice her absence, making her, in hindsight, an ideal next owner. Klein was a seamstress by trade and a collector of antique children's clothing, and when the doll surfaced among her belongings after her disappearance, investigators initially assumed it had simply been one of many items she had acquired over time, until a closer examination revealed that several dresses she had sewn matched the doll's exact measurements, despite the fact that no surviving sketches or patterns existed to suggest she had planned such garments in advance. According to letters later found in her apartment, Klein believed the doll to be incomplete when she first obtained it, writing to a friend that it felt unfinished, as though it had been interrupted mid-life, and she became obsessed with restoring it, brushing its hair nightly, repairing the fine cracks in its porcelain skin, and sewing increasingly elaborate outfits that no one else ever saw her give away or display publicly. Neighbors recalled hearing soft humming coming from Klein's apartment at odd hours, always accompanied by the faint sound of fabric scissors. And one neighbor distinctly remembered seeing Klein standing in her doorway late one evening, holding the doll close to her chest like a sleeping child, whispering something that sounded more like reassurance than conversation. As weeks passed, Klein's behavior grew erratic, and in her final letters, she described a sensation of being crowded in her own home, as if the rooms were shrinking, the air growing heavier whenever the doll was nearby, and mirrors becoming unbearable to look into because she felt as though she was never alone in their reflection. A fear that culminated in her covering every reflective surface in her apartment with cloth, including the doll's eyes, which she attempted to paint over after claiming they had begun to follow her thoughts rather than her movement. Klein vanished on the morning of October 9, 1924, leaving her apartment locked from the inside, breakfast half prepared on the stove, and her sewing machine still threaded, while the doll was discovered seated at the small kitchen table, dressed in a new outfit made from Klein's own clothing, its head angled slightly downward as if studying the empty chair across from it, and once again, there were no signs of struggle, forced entry, or escape. It was only after this third disappearance that an investigator named Harold Whitcomb began to notice a disturbing consistency in the case files, noting that in every instance the owner vanished suddenly. Personal belongings were arranged rather than scattered, and the doll remained behind, undamaged and prominently displayed, as though intentionally placed to be found, leading Whitcomb to propose quietly, unofficially, and at great personal risk, that the doll was not a passive object, but the fixed point around which the disappearances revolved. A theory that earned him ridicule from his peers and a formal warning from his superiors to abandon what they called superstitious speculation. Yet Whitcomb persisted, compiling photographs, witness accounts, and recovered writings into a private dossier that would later become the foundation for understanding that the doll did not simply accompany these vanishings, but appeared to orchestrate them, selecting individuals who lived at the margins, isolating them gradually, and leaving behind a silence so complete it erased not only the people themselves, but any clear explanation of where they had gone. Harold Whitcomb was not a man inclined toward superstition, nor was he known for entertaining theories that could not be supported by procedure and paperwork, which is precisely why his growing fixation on the doll unsettled those around him. As he approached the case, not as a believer, but as a man confronted by a sequence of facts that refused to align with coincidence. Reviewing the files late into the night, Whitcomb noticed that each disappearance followed the same subtle rhythm and initial period of ownership, marked by discomfort and sleep disturbance, followed by obsessive attention toward the object, then withdrawal from social contact, and finally a sudden, almost ceremonial vanishing in which the individual appeared to have prepared for departure rather than fled in fear. What troubled him most was the absence of chaos. No overturned furniture, no broken locks, no frantic attempts to escape, just order. As if the owners had willingly stepped away from their lives, leaving behind carefully arranged remnants of themselves, like offerings. Whitcomb began visiting the locations where the disappearances had occurred, standing in the rooms where the doll had last been seen, and though he never admitted it openly, his private notes reveal that he experienced the same sensations described by the missing owners of pressure in the chest, a persistent feeling of being observed from just outside his field of vision, and a growing reluctance to turn his back on empty corners. During one visit to Margaret Klein's apartment, Whitcomb found himself unable to leave the kitchen for nearly an hour, immobilized by the sensation that something unseen was standing between him and the doorway. And though nothing physically blocked his path, he later wrote that stepping forward felt equivalent to walking through a person who refused to move. As Whitcomb's investigation deepened, he discovered that records of the doll prior to 1923 were conspicuously absent, as if it had entered documented history fully formed, with no manufacturer, no artisan, and no origin point. And this absence disturbed him more than any witness testimony, because it suggested deliberate erasure rather than loss. He attempted to trace the materials used in the doll's construction, consulting experts who confirmed that the porcelain composition did not match known formulas from the period it supposedly originated in, and that the hair confirmed to be human showed signs of having been cut rather than shed, implying intentional collection. Whitcomb's superiors grew increasingly impatient with his obsession, reprimanding him for wasting departmental resources on what they now considered closed cases. And after he submitted a formal request to have the doll destroyed or sealed as evidence, he was removed from the investigation entirely, his access to the files revoked without explanation. In the weeks that followed, Whitcomb's behavior reportedly changed. Colleagues noted that he became withdrawn, distracted, and prone to staring at reflective surfaces for long periods. Once, snapping at a fellow officer who startled him by approaching from behind, accusing him of standing where he couldn't be seen, and, according to his wife, Whitcomb began waking in the night, convinced that someone was standing at the foot of their bed, watching him breathe. The final confirmed sighting of Harold Whitcomb occurred on February 2, 1925, when he was seen entering the evidence storage facility alone after hours, despite no longer being assigned to any active cases. And when he failed to return home that night, a search was conducted, revealing that the facility had been accessed using his credentials. Yet, only one item appeared to have been disturbed: the evidence box containing the doll, which was found empty while Whitcomb himself was never seen again, leaving behind a question that would haunt the department for decades. Had he taken the doll in an attempt to contain it? Or had the doll finally decided that he, too, belonged to it? After Harold Whitcomb's disappearance, the doll entered what investigators would later refer to as its silent period, a span of nearly 7 years during which no official records, police reports, or newspaper articles mention its existence at all. A gap so complete it initially appeared to suggest that the object had finally been destroyed, lost, or sealed away somewhere beyond reach. Yet this absence was not the end of the story, but a deliberate pause, as the doll did not vanish so much as slip into private hands, moving quietly through informal networks of collectors, estate clearances, and unregistered sales where items changed ownership without paperwork or witnesses willing to speak. The first sign that the pattern had resumed emerged in 1932, when a traveling carnival operating across the Midwest reported the unexplained disappearance of a sideshow caretaker named Edwin Pike, a man tasked with maintaining props and curiosities for the attraction's cabinet of oddities, a dim tent filled with malformed taxidermy, questionable relics, and objects advertised as cursed to draw in crowds. Though behind the scenes, Pike was known to be methodical, sober, and deeply skeptical of anything supernatural. According to payroll records, Pike had been hired only 2 weeks before his disappearance, and fellow workers recalled him complaining repeatedly about a new exhibit piece that had arrived unannounced one evening. Porcelain doll, delivered in a plain crate with no sender information, accompanied only by a typed note instructing that it be displayed facing away from mirrors and never left unattended overnight. Pike reportedly laughed off the instructions at first, but his attitude shifted rapidly, as several performers later stated that he became increasingly irritable, insisting on locking the doll's display case himself each night and refusing to allow anyone else to touch it, claiming vaguely that it didn't like being handled. In the days leading up to his disappearance, Pike was heard arguing inside the closed tent after hours, his voice raised as though scolding a child, while others described seeing the doll repositioned each morning in ways no one admitted to arranging, sometimes seated, sometimes standing upright despite the lack of any visible support. On the final night, Pike was seen alive. A storm swept through the carnival grounds, knocking out power to several tents, and when electricity was restored at dawn, Pike was nowhere to be found. His personal belongings left untouched in his trailer, his boots placed neatly beside his bed, and the cabinet of oddities tent discovered unlocked, its contents undisturbed except for the doll, which had been removed from its display case and placed at the center of the tent floor, facing the entrance, its glass eyes reflecting the faint morning light like wet stone. Authorities attributed Pike's disappearance to transient lifestyle risks, suggesting he had abandoned his post or fallen victim to foul play elsewhere. Yet no evidence supported either theory. And when the carnival abruptly disbanded weeks later due to declining attendance and mounting unease among staff, the doll once again slipped free, reportedly sold to a private buyer who paid in cash and refused a receipt, ensuring that the object would continue its journey unbound by records, leaving behind only another empty space where a person had once existed. The next confirmed appearance of the doll occurred not in public view, but within the walls of a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of rural Ohio, purchased in late 1933 by a newly married couple, Thomas and Eleanor Reeves, whose lives prior to that point appeared unremarkable, stable, and carefully documented, making what followed impossible to dismiss as coincidence or rumor. The doll entered their home as part of a bulk estate purchase acquired by Thomas, who supplemented his income by restoring and reselling old furniture. And according to a receipt later recovered, the item was listed simply as child's doll, damaged, a description that failed to capture the immediate unease Eleanor reportedly felt upon first seeing it, describing to her sister in a letter that the object seemed less like something made for a child and more like something made to resemble one. The Reeves initially stored the doll in an upstairs guest room, intending to repair and sell it. But within days, Eleanor began complaining of persistent headaches and a sensation of movement in the house at night, as though someone were walking softly from room to room long after the lamps had been extinguished, while Thomas dismissed her fears as nerves until he himself began waking to the sound. A faint humming drifting from the upper floor, a tune he could never recall clearly once morning came. Over time, the couple noticed small changes in the home that neither could explain. Doors left ajar, despite being closed the night before. Furniture subtly repositioned, and the recurring impression that the upstairs hallway felt narrower each day, forcing Eleanor to brush the walls as she passed, a detail she fixated on in her letters, writing that the house felt as though it were learning how much space we need. When the Reeves attempted to move the doll to the cellar, they found it returned to the guest room hours later, its porcelain hands folded neatly in its lap, despite the cellar door remaining locked. And after a second attempt resulted in the same outcome, Thomas nailed the doll into a wooden crate and placed it in the barn, only to discover the crate empty the following morning and the doll seated upright on the staircase leading to the second floor, positioned at eye level, as if waiting to be acknowledged. Eleanor's condition deteriorated rapidly after that, as she began avoiding mirrors and windows, claiming that reflections lagged behind her movements, and telling her husband in a trembling voice that the house was no longer quiet when they slept, but filled with the sound of breathing that did not belong to either of them. A fear that culminated in her refusal to sleep anywhere except the downstairs parlor, where she positioned chairs against the doors each night, despite there being no sign of intrusion. Thomas finally contacted local authorities in early spring of 1934, reporting disturbances and requesting advice rather than intervention, but before any follow-up could occur, neighbors noticed smoke rising from the Reeves farmhouse late one evening, only to find the fire already extinguished upon arrival, having burned only a single upstairs room, the guest room, where the doll had first been kept, while leaving the rest of the house untouched. And inside that blackened space, amid the smell of soot and damp ash, the doll was found intact, seated on the scorched floorboards, its porcelain unmarked by heat, facing the doorway, while Thomas and Eleanor Reeves were nowhere to be found, their coats, shoes, and personal belongings still inside the house, arranged neatly as if laid out in preparation for a journey they never returned from. Following the disappearance of Thomas and Eleanor Reeves, the farmhouse remained abandoned for for nearly 2 years. Its contents left untouched due to ongoing legal disputes between distant relatives who had little interest in claiming the isolated property. And it was during this period that the doll once again passed silently into new ownership. Acquired in 1936 by a private collector named Leonard Halvorson, a man whose reputation among antique circles bordered on obsessive, known for purchasing items rumored to be cursed, possessed, or historically controversial, not out of belief, but out of a fascination with objects that carried emotional or psychological weight, which he believed gave them cultural value. Halvorson operated from a sprawling townhouse in Chicago, where he cataloged his acquisitions with meticulous detail, assigning each object a storage case, documentation file, and photographic record. And unlike previous owners, he approached the doll with clinical detachment, immediately noting inconsistencies in its craftsmanship, including the irregular aging of its porcelain, the unnatural texture of its hair, and the subtle asymmetry in its facial expression that seemed to resist accurate sketching, as though its features shifted slightly depending on lighting and angle. Halvorson placed the doll inside a reinforced glass display cabinet within his private archive room, installing multiple locks and instructing his staff never to handle it without supervision. Yet within weeks, he began recording unusual disturbances in his catalog journals, describing moments when he entered the archive to find the cabinet door unlocked despite no signs of tampering, or discovering that the doll had rotated inside the case, sometimes facing the room's entrance, other times turned toward reflective surfaces, which he eventually covered with cloth after noting that reflections appeared to distort the doll's proportions in ways that made accurate documentation impossible. Halvorson's staff reported growing unease around the archive, claiming the air inside felt heavier than in the rest of the house, and several assistants resigned after complaining of recurring nightmares involving a child standing silently in doorways or hallways, though none could describe the figure's face. Determined to maintain control over what he still considered a psychological phenomenon rather than a supernatural one, Halvorson attempted a series of containment measures, including sealing the doll inside a custom-built steel trunk, lined with velvet padding, and storing it in a locked basement vault, an action he documented in detail, noting with satisfaction that the object was now securely isolated. Yet 3 nights later, he recorded a final entry stating simply that the trunk had been discovered open, the internal padding undisturbed, and the doll found seated at the top of the basement stairs, positioned in such a way that anyone descending would encounter it at eye level. A discovery that purportedly caused Halvorson to laugh nervously before ordering the doll returned to the vault. In the weeks that followed, Halvorson's behavior changed dramatically. Visitors described him as distracted, frequently pausing mid-conversation to glance toward empty corners, while servants reported hearing him speaking softly to someone late at night inside the archive room, though no second voice was ever heard. On the evening of August 17, 1937, Halvorson hosted a small gathering of fellow collectors, proudly showcasing his archive. Yet, when guests later attempted to leave, they found Halvorson missing from the room, despite the fact that he had been standing only moments earlier beside the display cabinet containing the doll, which was discovered open, the glass door hanging ajar, and the doll placed carefully on Halvorson's catalog desk, surrounded by his handwritten notes. while his jacket and pocket watch lay folded neatly on the chair behind him, as if he had stepped out of them deliberately. Police investigations yielded no signs of forced entry or struggle. And although Halverson's extensive catalog preserved detailed histories for thousands of objects, his final records regarding the doll consisted of a single incomplete sentence that ended leaving behind the unsettling implication that even a man who dedicated his life to documenting the past could not finish recording what this object truly was, as the doll once again remained silent and intact, waiting for the next owner to discover it. As the world moved into the mid-20th century, the doll's trail re-emerged, not just in whispered rumors or vanished owners, but in the era's burgeoning technology, audio recordings, photographs, and early home films that began to capture evidence of its presence and the growing horror that surrounded it. In 1952, a young couple named the Harrisons purchased a rural property in New England, unaware that the doll was already in their midst, left behind in the attic as part of an unmarked box of forgotten heirlooms inherited from the previous owners. And it was their son, Timothy, who first discovered the doll hidden beneath layers of dusty linens. Its porcelain face cracked and stained, but eyes still glinting with an unnerving life. Timothy's fascination quickly turned to fear as strange noises began echoing through the house, soft crying, footsteps pacing the hallways at night, and faint whispering voices that seemed to seep from the walls. Phenomena recorded unwittingly on his father's reel-to-reel tape recorder, which captured hours of static interrupted by chilling bursts of indistinct murmurs and what some experts would later interpret as childlike laughter mixed with urgent pleading. Photographs taken by the family also revealed inexplicable anomalies, blurred shapes lurking in corners, shadows cast in impossible directions, and on one particularly disturbing image, the doll appearing in a different room from where it was last seen, its head subtly turned toward the camera with an expression that seemed to mock the photographer. Despite these signs, the Harrisons attempted to maintain normalcy, dismissing the occurrences as tricks of the mind or the product of an old house settling, until the day Timothy vanished without a trace, leaving behind a room locked from the inside, his belongings scattered as if hurriedly abandoned, and the doll positioned prominently on his bed, staring directly at the door, its glass eyes catching the morning light like dark wells of despair. Police investigations uncovered no evidence of foul play or forced entry, and neighbors reported hearing the child's laughter echoing faintly from the house long after the family moved away, marking the first time that recordings had preserved not just silence or fear, but a voice, one that would echo through future investigations and deepen the mystery of the doll's enduring terror. In 1955, 3 years after the Harrisons' disappearance, a curious item surfaced in an estate sale of a farmhouse in rural Massachusetts. Box of old 8mm film reels, labeled only with a date and the initials MS, which would later become known among paranormal researchers as the Reeves footage, named after an earlier owner of the doll. And the film quickly gained notoriety for the chilling and inexplicable images it contained. The footage opens with a seemingly innocent domestic scene, an elderly woman, presumed to be Margaret Reeves, gently dusting an antique cabinet. Yet, as the film progresses, subtle but increasingly, disturbing anomalies appear. Shadows flicker unnaturally across the walls. The room temperature visibly distorts in shimmering waves, and at one point, the doll itself is caught moving ever so slightly between frames, its head turning just enough to face the camera directly in a way that no human hand could explain. The climax of the footage shows the woman sitting beside the doll, holding it close as a whispering voice overlays the silent film, recorded separately but synced mysteriously in later copies, murmuring phrases in an unknown language that researchers have since failed to decipher despite extensive linguistic analysis. And the woman's expression shifts from serene to terrified in seconds, as if reacting to an unseen presence just beyond the camera's field of vision. The reel ends abruptly, with the woman standing and walking toward a dark doorway, beyond which the film is obscured by static and flickering light, and no further footage exists to explain what happened next. The provenance of the reels remains uncertain, but their discovery reignited public interest in the doll and coincided with a rise in reported sightings of the object in private collections and abandoned properties across the Northeast. For investigators, the Reeves footage represents the first documented visual proof of the doll's apparent ability to manipulate its surroundings and the minds of those who come near it, a phenomenon that would continue to baffle experts well into the modern era and fuel a growing obsession among paranormal circles with uncovering the truth behind the doll's origins and its insidious power to erase those who possess it. The final fragment of the doll's mid-century story comes from a set of reel-to-reel audio tapes discovered decades later in the basement of a long-abandoned police precinct in Boston, recorded by an unnamed detective assigned to investigate the mysterious disappearances linked to the doll. And though the tapes were heavily degraded and filled with static, they captured a chilling conversation that blurred the line between reality and nightmare, beginning with the detective's calm descriptions of the known facts and eyewitness testimonies before slowly unraveling into a sequence of disturbing sounds, unintelligible whispers, creaking floorboards, and what sounded unmistakably like a child's voice, soft yet urgent, calling a name repeatedly that matched none of the known victims, but seemed to draw listeners deeper into the darkness. Over the course of the recording, the detective's voice becomes strained, occasionally overlapping with a second voice that mimics his tone, but distorts it into something eerie and unnatural, as if the doll itself were speaking through the device. And towards the end, a faint crying can be heard beneath the voices, growing louder until the tape abruptly cuts off mid-sentence, leaving behind an oppressive silence that many who have listened describe as suffocating, a void that feels less like absence and more like something actively consuming the space it occupies. Attempts to locate the detective's identity or the original source of the tapes, with official records showing no officer matching the descriptions, and the precinct itself was closed soon after the recordings were made, amid rumors of unexplained phenomena and unexplained disappearances within the department. Today, these tapes serve as the earliest known audio evidence of the doll's malevolent presence, a haunting reminder that some objects carry not just history, but something far darker, intent that persists across time, continuing to erase those who dare to own or even approach it, leaving behind only silence, shadows, and a porcelain face that watches, waits, and waits. Image prompt and the rise of digital media in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The doll that had haunted silent homes and whispered through analog recordings took on a new form of terror, spreading not just through physical possession, but through pixels and screens, becoming an urban legend fueled by viral videos, online forums, and social media threads that documented the strange and sometimes dangerous encounters of those who claim to have found or owned the infamous porcelain doll. The first major online surge began around 2007, when a series of anonymously uploaded videos titled simply "The Doll That Moves" appeared on early video platforms, showing a faded, cracked doll in various locations, empty rooms, abandoned houses, and storage units caught on shaky, low-resolution camera, subtly shifting position between clips, accompanied by eerie, ambient noise that many viewers claimed induced nightmares and unexplained anxiety after watching. These videos sparked widespread fascination and fear, prompting communities of amateur paranormal investigators and collectors to share stories, photos, and videos of their own, many reporting strange glitches in footage, distorted voices captured on phone recordings, and inexplicable disappearances of the doll from homes and storage spaces, sometimes only to reappear in entirely different states or even countries with no known means of transport. One notable case involved a young woman named Jessica Monroe, who documented her experience through a series of vlogs detailing the escalation of strange phenomena after acquiring a doll matching the description, including sleep paralysis episodes, shadowy figures appearing in her peripheral vision, and electronic devices malfunctioning inexplicably, culminating in her vanishing one night after posting a final, chilling video where the doll appears to move closer to the camera on its own, eyes glinting with unnatural life. Jessica's last footage remains one of the most viewed and debated videos on paranormal channels, fueling a digital mythos that transformed the doll from a forgotten relic into a symbol of relentless and evolving dread, proof that some horrors adapt with the times, slipping through the cracks of both reality and the digital world, waiting to consume the next victim. As the doll's legend spread online, it birthed something far more disturbing than mere fascination. A secretive and growing online cult known simply as the Watchers, a loosely organized group of individuals obsessed with the doll's mythology, who believed that by observing, recording, and sharing encounters with the object, they could somehow harness its dark power, or at least protect themselves from its influence. And their activities ranged from documenting alleged sightings in abandoned buildings to conducting live-streamed seances aimed at provoking the doll's presence, all while maintaining a strict code of silence about the true origins of the object, which they claimed was connected to an ancient curse older than any known civilization, involving child spirits trapped in porcelain vessels as vessels of vengeance. The Watchers operated mostly on encrypted forums and private chat rooms, but their influence spilled into public platforms, where videos tagged with cryptic hashtags attracted thousands of views and comments from believers, skeptics, and the curious alike, creating an ever-growing mythos that blurred the lines between reality and digital folklore. and some members shared unsettling stories of members who disappeared shortly after posting particularly provocative content, fueling rumors that the doll's curse extended into the digital realm itself. One notable incident involved a user known only as CRX, who live-streamed an overnight vigil inside an abandoned mansion rumored to be connected to the doll's early history. And viewers reported that during the stream, the camera feed began glitching violently. Distorted faces appeared in the static, and the audio captured low, guttural whispers that seemed to chant in unison, culminating in a sudden blackout before the feed abruptly ended and CRX was never heard from again. An event that sent shockwaves through paranormal communities and intensified fears that watching or even acknowledging the doll could invite its wrath. Despite or perhaps because of these dangers, the watchers grew, and their digital footprint transformed the doll from a local haunted object into a modern symbol of inescapable dread, illustrating how technology can both document and amplify fear, while the doll itself, unseen but always present, continued to claim victims, one view, one post, and one disappearance at a time. The most terrifying aspect of the doll's resurgence in the digital age lies not just in the stories or sightings, but in the inexplicable disappearances linked directly to online exposure and interaction, cases that began accumulating from 2010 onward, when social media platforms and video sharing sites made it possible for anyone to broadcast their experiences live to an audience, creating a new breed of witnesses and victims whose fates blurred the lines between viral sensation and genuine tragedy. One such case involved a popular paranormal vlogger named Lena Morales, whose channel specialized in exploring haunted locations and cursed objects. And after receiving an unmarked package containing a cracked porcelain doll matching the infamous description, she documented her mounting unease and escalating supernatural events through daily uploads that captivated thousands, only for her to vanish during a live stream where viewers watched in horror as the doll appeared to move on its own, followed by sudden static and a chilling silence that lasted hours before the stream was cut. In the aftermath, investigations found no trace of Lena or the doll, though her digital footprint remained, including cryptic final messages embedded in video metadata and unsettling glitches suggesting her presence persisted somehow within the network itself. A haunting digital echo. Similar cases followed a streamer named Jason Lee disappearing during a virtual reality session while attempting to document paranormal phenomena. A social media influencer posting eerie selfies with the doll only to delete their accounts days before vanishing. And countless others whose last online posts contained distorted images, faint voices, or shadowy figures lurking just beyond view-all, contributing to a growing body of evidence that the doll's curse had evolved to infect not just physical space, but the very networks meant to connect us, turning screens into gateways of dread and disappearance. Despite warnings from law enforcement and cybersecurity experts, the doll's digital legend continues to grow, feeding on fear, attention, and the insatiable curiosity of a connected world. While the porcelain eyes watch relentlessly from countless devices, waiting silently for the next viewer to look too long, listen too closely, or reach out and end that moment. The line between observer and victim vanishes forever. In recent years, the infamous porcelain doll resurfaced under circumstances that suggest its haunting legacy is far from over. As it was discovered in 2022 by a young urban explorer named Maya Collins, who documented her exploration of an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of Chicago, a place rumored to have ties to the doll's early owners and shrouded in local legends of disappearances and strange phenomena. During her visit, Maya found a hidden room sealed behind a false wall, inside which the doll sat perched on a dusty shelf, its cracked porcelain face eerily illuminated by the flashlight's beam, eyes seeming to gleam with an unsettling intelligence that defied explanation. And despite initial hesitation, she took the doll, posting footage of her discovery online, sparking immediate viral interest and fear among viewers familiar with the legend. What followed was a rapid escalation of unexplained events. Maya reported shadow figures lurking in her apartment, electronic devices malfunctioning, and recurring nightmares featuring a childlike voice pleading for release. Phenomena she captured in disturbing videos that blurred the line between reality and staged content. Friends and family expressed concern as Maya's behavior grew increasingly erratic, with moments of intense paranoia interspersed with chilling calm. And shortly after posting a live stream promising to reveal the truth behind the doll's curse, she vanished without a trace, leaving only her equipment behind and the doll resting silently on her desk, untouched and watching. Local authorities found no evidence of foul play, and digital forensic experts analyzing Maya's online presence discovered encrypted messages hidden in her uploads, suggesting she had uncovered secrets deeper than anyone anticipated. But what those secrets were remains unknown, buried beneath layers of cryptic code and disappearing accounts. While the doll once again waits silent, patient, and eternally watching, ready to claim its next owner in a world where terror transcends the physical and enters the realm of endless digital shadows. After Maya Collins' disappearance, the investigation took an unexpected turn when cyber experts analyzing her devices uncovered a series of encrypted files hidden deep within her video footage and online posts. Files that appeared to contain fragmented code, symbols interwoven with audio distortions, and visual glitches in arcane digital language that defied conventional decryption and seemed to pulse with a life of its own, leading researchers to speculate that the doll's curse had evolved into a hybrid phenomenon, merging the supernatural with advanced technology in a way that blurred the boundaries between reality and cyberspace. Among the recovered data were unsettling messages, some appearing to be warnings, others cryptic commands, and still others fragments of ancient texts referring to the doll as a vessel for a trapped spirit, seeking release through digital means, with implications that every upload, every view, and every interaction fed the entity's power, creating a networked curse that spread virally, infecting minds and devices alike. Paranoia and fear gripped those who attempted to study the files too closely, as reports emerged of experts experiencing nightmares, sudden illnesses, and even disappearances resembling those of the doll's past victims, reinforcing the idea that the curse was no longer confined to physical objects but had become a living algorithm, an unstoppable digital entity weaving through the very fabric of the internet. Attempts to quarantine or delete the corrupted files failed repeatedly, as copies appeared on forums, private servers, and encrypted channels worldwide, each new upload carrying with it the same inexplicable phenomena, glitches that morphed into faces, voices that whispered in languages no one understood, and an overwhelming sense of being watched and hunted through the screens themselves. The doll, long thought to be merely an artifact of bygone terror, had transcended, becoming a symbol of fear, adapted to the modern age, an eternal enigma lurking at the intersection of myth, technology, and the human psyche, poised to ensnare anyone who dares to seek the truth hidden in the code. In the chilling conclusion of the doll's modern saga, the figure known only as the Final Watcher emerged from the shadows of the internet, a reclusive hacker and paranormal researcher who claimed to have uncovered the secret to breaking the doll's curse, broadcasting a series of encrypted live streams that combined ancient rituals with cutting-edge technology in a desperate attempt to sever the entity's hold on both physical and digital worlds. Followers of the Watchers waited breathlessly as the hacker ventured into abandoned buildings tied to the doll's history, performing ceremonies designed to bind or banish the spirit trapped within the porcelain shell, while simultaneously attempting to quarantine the digital code infecting the global network. A race against time, complicated by inexplicable interference that caused screens to flicker, feeds to cut abruptly, and cryptic messages to appear on viewers' devices, warning them to stop watching or suffer the same fate. The Final Watcher's identity remains unknown, their location a mystery, but their final transmission a haunting blend of whispered incantations, static, and the faint sound of porcelain clicking, ended with a chilling message. The Watcher watches still, and now, so do you, before the stream dissolved into endless static, and all contact was lost. In the days that followed, reports surfaced worldwide of viewers experiencing sudden blackouts, waking to find missing time, or discovering the doll inexplicably present in their homes despite never having owned it, suggesting that while the curse may have been challenged, it was far from defeated. And perhaps the true horror lies not in the doll itself, but in the unending cycle of observation, possession, and disappearance it creates, an eternal dance between victim and watcher, where the line between reality and nightmare blurs, and the porcelain eyes forever remain watching, waiting, and calling out to the next soul braver foolish enough to look too closely.